They laughed when I refused to join their little neighborhood club. They called me stubborn, arrogant, even dangerous. But when my home burned to the ground in the dead of night and the HOA president smirked at the ashes, I knew it wasn't just petty revenge. What they didn't know, though, was that I wasn't just another homeowner. I was the one man they should have never crossed, a sitting federal judge with the power to dismantle everything they ever built. I moved to Pine Ridge Estates for peace. After 29 years on the federal bench, hundreds of high-profile cases, and countless threats and pressure from all sides, I needed a quiet place to breathe. Something simple. Just land, trees, and the sound of birds. I found the perfect place on the edge of the community, a house nestled among tall pines, backed by a wooded slope, with a private gravel driveway that touched the neighborhood only at its tip. That part mattered more than I realized. My land was technically outside the homeowners association boundary, just barely, but close enough to make me a problem for them. I didn't tell anyone who I was. That's not my way. I never needed the attention, and in this business, attention can be dangerous. I paid for the house in cash, used my initials and a private holding trust to keep things clean. I just wanted to be another quiet man in a quiet place. And for the first few weeks it was exactly that. I spent my days restoring the garden, installing shelves in the garage, and walking my old Labrador, Buster, through the woods behind the house. We were both retired, in our own ways. He from chasing tennis balls, and me from chasing justice across courtrooms filled with suits and noise. But peace doesn't last long when people think you don't belong. The first visit from the HOA came in the form of a folded flyer, tucked into my mailbox. Welcome to the neighborhood. Join the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. Your voice matters. In small print was a list of fees: $2,000 yearly dues, $180 initiation fee, and an ongoing community compliance surcharge of $15 per month. I read it, smiled politely to myself, and tossed it into the trash. I knew my property was not part of the HOA charter. I had studied the land records before I ever stepped foot on the lot. I wasn't interested in swimming pools or lawn color guidelines. I wanted pine trees and silence. The second visit was more direct. A week later, a woman in a navy pantsuit knocked on my door, middle-aged, hair tight in a bun, clipboard in hand. "Good morning," she said with a two-eyed smile. "I'm Janice Porter, president of the Pine Ridge HOA. Just wanted to say hello and go over a few community guidelines." I stepped outside, pulling the door behind me gently so Buster wouldn't slip out. "Appreciate the visit, but I won't be needing any guidelines," I said, keeping my voice level. "My property isn't under HOA jurisdiction." She blinked, just once, and then smiled again, tighter this time. "I understand your lot is just outside the mapped boundary." "Yes, but since your driveway connects through our entrance, we expect cooperation. Everyone here benefits from the community, and we expect everyone to contribute. I maintain my own utilities, my own waste service, and my land's never been part of your charter," I replied. "I don't want to argue. I just want peace." That smile didn't budge. "Well, you'll find things run smoother if we're all on the same page," she said. "We'll be in touch." And with that, she walked off, heels tapping on my gravel like a judge's gavel. I watched her go, saying nothing, but my instincts buzzed. I had seen that tone before in lawyers who smiled while twisting knives, in politicians who hid threats behind greetings. It wasn't a welcome, it was a warning. Over the next month, strange things started to happen. I came home one day to find a bright orange notice taped to my front window: unapproved structural modification, removed within 14 days. I hadn't changed anything, just moved in and patched a fence. The notice was unsigned, but stamped with the HOA's logo. Another morning I found my trash bins turned over in the street. One had been taken altogether. Buster barked into the woods that night, pacing in circles. When I went outside with a flashlight, I found footprints along the edge of my property boot. Prints headed toward my back deck, then vanishing into the woods again. Still, I kept my calm. I had dealt with worse. I had sat across from cartel enforcers, arms dealers, and dirty cops who wore grins just like Janice Porter's. But those people had reasons. They wanted freedom, power, escape. This HOA, this little community group, in pressed polos and pastel houses, wanted control. And I had told them no. One afternoon, I received a letter by certified mail. It was from the HOA legal office. It accused me of willful disregard of community compliance protocols and warned of civil penalties, liens, and further enforcement actions. I read it twice, then carefully scanned it into my files. The letter was thin on law, heavy on threats, and dead wrong. They had no authority over me, but they were acting like they did. I made one call to a friend in the property records department just to confirm what I already knew. My land was exempt, outside of their governance, but facts wouldn't matter to people determined to punish defiance. 2 days later, someone threw eggs at my front door in the middle of the night. I didn't see who it was. No cameras caught it. But I found the shells in the morning and cleaned the mess myself. That was the last straw. I decided to document everything. I set up hidden cameras near the tree line, I photographed every note, every sticker, every suspicious visitor. I emailed copies to a private encrypted account. I even installed a backup generator in the crawlspace, just in case. I knew how to play the long game, but I also knew that predators strike when they think their prey is vulnerable. Then came the day that confirmed my fears. I came home from a walk with Buster to find a strange SUV parked in front of my property. A man stepped out, bald, heavyset, with sunglasses and a fake security badge clipped to his belt. "You can't park here, sir," he said. "This is HOA property." I calmly pointed to the survey marker. "This here's my land. You're trespassing." He didn't move. "We're just checking compliance," he muttered. "You've got an unapproved satellite dish on your roof." I laughed out loud. "That dish was installed by the previous owner 12 years ago, and again, you don't control this property." The man squinted. "You sure you want to play this game, old man?" And there it was. The mask slipped. I stepped forward and looked him in the eye. "I'm not playing anything, but I promise you, if you or anyone from your group steps foot past that marker again, you're going to regret it more than you can imagine." He said nothing, just turned back to his SUV and drove away, tires spitting gravel behind him. That night, I wrote down everything. The visit, his face, his car's plates, and I wrote something else too, a statement for the record, in case things got worse. I wasn't afraid, but I was alert. I didn't build a career in federal court without knowing when pressure turns to violence. What they didn't understand was that I was never truly alone. I had networks, friends in federal law enforcement, allies who respected the robe I wore and the decisions I'd handed down. If they thought I was just some retired man living in the woods, they were about to learn how wrong they were. And still, despite everything, I didn't strike first. That wasn't my way. I gave them the chance to stop, to walk away, to choose reason over pride. They didn't. They chose fire. And when they did, they burned more than wood. They ignited a storm they could never contain. It was just past 2 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of cracking. Not the soft creak of a house settling, but a sharp, splitting noise like dry wood under pressure. At first I thought it might have been a fallen branch or maybe a raccoon, rummaging around the porch. But then came the scent, acrid, hot. My eyes snapped open. Smoke, thick and bitter. Not from the fireplace, not from the woods. This was something else. I threw off the blanket and grabbed my flashlight. Buster, already awake and whimpering, paced nervously at the bedroom door. I opened it, and a thin haze drifted into the room. The hallway was glowing faint orange. My stomach dropped. I rushed toward the living room. One look out the window confirmed it, flames rising fast on the back deck, licking up the siding like they were hungry for more. My house was on fire. I grabbed the go bag I always kept by the nightstand, old habits from my time on the bench. It held essential documents, cash, a burner phone, and a flash drive loaded with personal files. I slung it over my shoulder, opened the back door, and was hit by a wave of heat so intense I had to shield my face with my forearm. The flames were climbing fast. Too fast. This wasn't an accident. This was set. I turned heel and moved for the front door, guiding Buster close behind me. The smoke was thicker now, burning my lungs and making my eyes tear. I could hear the fire chewing through the structure, wood splintering, windows cracking, insulation popping behind the walls. I stumbled out into the front yard and pulled my shirt over my mouth. The house was done. I knew it in that moment. Even before the fire truck's distant sirens echoed through the neighborhood, I could see it in the way the flames engulfed the roofline. A column of black smoke spiraled into the starless sky, and the heat pushed back the night like a furnace door left open. I stood barefoot in the grass, stunned. Buster leaned against my leg, trembling. I had seen war zones. I had sentenced murderers. I had outlasted threats from dangerous men with real power. But watching your home, your retreat, your sanctuary vanish in flames, it does something to you, something cold. Then I saw her, Janice Porter, standing calmly in her doorway 2 houses down, hair neatly tied, silk robe on, mug in her hand. She wasn't just awake, she was waiting, watching. And when she saw me glance in her direction, she raised that mug slightly like a toast, and then she smiled. Not a polite smile, not one of pity or concern, a smirk, quiet, wicked satisfaction. It chilled me deeper than the fire ever could. The fire trucks finally arrived too late to save the house. They worked for nearly an hour to extinguish the blaze, soaking the remains in foam and water. The fire chief approached me once the flames were under control. "Sorry, sir. This one moved fast. Might have been started in multiple places. You live alone?" I nodded, trying not to cough. "Just me and my dog." "You smell accelerant?" he asked quietly. "Yeah," I said. "Gasoline." He gave me a look. Not surprised, just tired. "We'll open an investigation." "Got any enemies?" I didn't answer. Instead, I looked back toward Janice's house. Her lights were off now. At dawn, I walked through the remains. The house was reduced to blackened, bones-charred beams, melted glass, twisted metal. The oak desk I'd used to write court opinions was gone. The bookcases, the old framed photo of me with a former president handing me my federal appointment certificate, it was just ash now. But some things survived. the flash drive in my go bag, the camera feeds, and my memory. Later that day, I checked the footage. 2 hidden trail cams I'd installed near the backwoods had survived. I pulled the memory cards, loaded them onto a secure laptop, and began to scan the footage. It didn't take long. At exactly 1:48 a.m., a hooded figure moved across the tree line behind my house. They crouched near the propane tank, poured something, then circled around to the back deck. 30 seconds later, ignition, a burst of light. Then the fire caught like it had been waiting, but the figure made one mistake. As they sprinted away, they glanced back, and their hood fell off. I paused the video, zoomed in. It was him, the same heavy-set man with the fake security badge, the one who had threatened me weeks earlier. I hadn't gotten his name back then, but I had his face now, and that was all I needed. I picked up the burner phone and called a number I hadn't used in over 3 years. It rang twice before a voice answered. Judge R. Chris. I said, I need a favor. Quiet, urgent, say no more. Send me what you've got. Within the hour, I had 2 federal agents reviewing the footage. One of them, Marquez, had worked with me on a corruption case a decade ago. Trusted, precise. The other was new, but sharp. They didn't ask why a retired judge had surveillance footage. They just did their jobs. This is arson, Marquez said, watching the slowed clip. And he's not working alone. I know, I said. This wasn't just to scare me. They wanted me gone. Marquez looked at me. You think it was the HOA? I don't think, I replied. I know. Over the next few days, the investigation began to expand. Quiet subpoenas were issued for HOA communications, emails, meeting notes, internal chat logs. You'd be amazed what people say when they believe no one's watching. One board member cracked first. A young man named Darren, newly elected. He called me in secret. I didn't know they were going that far, he whispered. I thought it was just about fines. Maybe a lien, but they started talking about removing problems permanently. I thought it was a joke. He sent me emails between Janice and 2 other board members. Subject line, outlier solution. They spoke in vague terms, final steps, clean closure. He won't say no after this. But the timeline matched. The tone was clear. This wasn't a grudge. It was a plan. I compiled everything, passed it to Marquez. By then, we had a name for the arsonist. Glenn Nichols, a former security contractor, no current license, no employment record, but a known associate of Janice Porter, her cousin. The case was building faster than a bonfire, but I didn't speak to the media. I didn't even speak to my neighbors. Let them speculate. Let Janice sleep in that false comfort for a few more nights, believing she had one, believing I had been broken. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had once overseen racketeering cases involving international syndicates. I'd ruled on matters that determined the futures of corporations, cities, even governors. I'd sentenced men who made Janice look like a schoolyard bully. And through it all, I never flinched, never blinked. So burning my house, that wasn't the end, it was the beginning. The arrests came quietly, but swiftly. First, Glenn Nichols taken into custody at a gas station 2 towns over. He tried to run, didn't make it past the parking lot. Then came the knock on Janice's door. She answered, calm as always, in her robe and slippers, until she saw the badge. Marquez told me she went pale, whispered something like he wasn't supposed to, and then surrendered. They found everything in her email, the planning, the payments, even the timeline of the fire. And when they raided her home office, HOA funds misused, records falsified, even photos of my house circled with red pen. It was obsessive. The neighborhood went silent that week. Neighbors who once gave polite waves now avoided eye contact. Some seemed ashamed, others scared. A few brought cookies and weak apologies to my temporary rental house, but I didn't answer the door. Not yet. Let them sit with the knowledge. Let them wonder who I really was. They would find out soon enough, because I wasn't rebuilding just a house. I was about to dismantle everything the HOA thought they controlled. And I was going to do it the same way I had taken down organized crime, corrupt mayors, and billion-dollar fraud rings, legally, precisely, without mercy. 2 weeks after the fire, the neighborhood had grown quiet. Not peaceful quiet in the way a courtroom falls silent right before a verdict is read. The kind of silence that makes your skin itch, like something's about to snap. Most people didn't know what had really happened. They knew the house at the edge of the trees had burned down. They knew the HOA president, Janice Porter, had been taken away in an unmarked vehicle. But the rest, just rumors. And I didn't correct them. I wanted the silence. Let them wonder, let them whisper over trimmed hedges and passive-aggressive community meetings. What I was doing required focus and time. The investigation had already pulled back the curtain. What started as HOA harassment was just the tip of something deeper. The feds had uncovered fraudulent use of HOA. Tens of thousands of dollars funneled into personal accounts, all disguised as beautification or community security. Janice had built an empire on fear and manipulation, fake violations, intimidation, hidden penalties, and it had worked for years because nobody had stood up to her. Until I did. The thing about power is, people get too comfortable with it. Janice assumed she controlled the board, the bylaws, even the people, but power built on fear collapses. The The moment someone stands up without flinching, and I never flinched. Marquez and the federal team were working full-time on the financial side, but I wasn't done. I wanted more than criminal charges. I wanted the entire HOA structure dismantled from the ground up legally, publicly, and permanently so. I began to build my case. From a small rented room in the federal housing unit nearby, I laid out everything I needed. I contacted a quiet, sharp real estate attorney I'd worked with years ago. Her name was Karen Liu, detail-oriented, sharp as a scalpel. I sent her everything: did maps, property records, community charters, the original HOA formation documents, and in less than 72 hours, she called me with something explosive. "Judge," she said, voice tight with excitement, "Pine Ridge Estates HOA charter was never updated after they expanded the community boundary in 2009. That expansion included about 20 new homes, including yours. But legally, the HOA never had the right to enforce anything beyond the original section." I sat forward. "So everything they've done to those homes since then is void. Every fine, every lien, every enforcement action. So, legally unenforceable." That was the crack I needed. I requested all HOA records through a federal subpoena under the umbrella of the ongoing financial fraud investigation. Meeting minutes, voting records, enforcement logs, all of it, and what we found was worse than I expected. In several cases, the HOA had pushed homeowners into foreclosure using fake violations. One family lost their home after a series of absurd fines: $75 for a tube-right porch light, $200 for excessive wind chimes, and $500 for failure to prune. The violations stacked up, and when they couldn't pay, the HOA placed a lien on their property. When they contested it, Janice had a lawyer friend fast-track a court order won based on falsified documents. It wasn't just corruption, it was predatory theft. They had stolen homes, silenced complaints, and built their little kingdom through intimidation dressed up as policy. And now, I had the receipts. I compiled everything: dozens of documented abuses, a full timeline of the HOA's illegal enforcement beyond their charter, and direct evidence linking Janice to the arson. But I didn't just want to hand it over quietly. No, I wanted this to be a message. So, I filed a federal injunction against the HOA board, personally, under my full legal name, Judge Marshall R. Hayes, United States District Court, senior status. That title meant I was still active, still with power, and now using it without the robe, but with the full force of law behind me. The board members panicked. 3 resigned the same day the injunction hit. One lawyered up and tried to spin the whole thing as a misunderstanding. But the press had already caught wind. The headline hit the morning after: "Federal judge exposes HOA corruption after arson attack on his home." The article ran in national news. Photos of the burned-down house, my long career on the bench, and the cold, hard truth about what Pine Ridge Estates had been hiding for years. Victims came forward, people who had quietly suffered fines, threats, and shame. One woman said her teenage son was chased by HOA-hired security for riding a bike without reflectors. Another man had been fined $1,000 for building a small ramp for his disabled wife. They had been told it didn't meet the visual standards of the community. Each story made my blood boil, but it also fueled the case. With the federal investigation now in full swing and media attention growing, Janice's lawyer reached out with a deal. They wanted to plead her out quietly, lighter sentence, restitution, a formal resignation. I refused. I wanted trial. I wanted every resident, every family she had wronged, to see her sit at a defendant's table and answer for what she did. I wanted cameras, I wanted sunlight, because that's what kills rot. In the meantime, I began talking to the neighbors, the real ones, not the board members or HOA officers, but the residents who had spent years under this iron-fisted regime. They were hesitant, at first nervous, unsure what to say, but once they realized I wasn't just another angry homeowner, they began to open up. One man, Hector Alvarez, invited me to sit with his family. He told me how he'd received over 40 warnings in 2 years, many of them without explanation. "We almost moved," he said. "My wife had panic attacks. We thought we were cursed." A single mother named Yasmin told me how she had stopped planting flowers because the HOA kept removing them, saying they weren't approved color schemes. A retired veteran named Davis had been threatened with legal action because he flew an American flag on a pole that was too tall. These weren't just stories. They were lives disrupted, peace stolen from people who had paid to live safely in their own homes. And now they had a voice. I helped them file a civil class action suit. Over 30 residents signed on in the first week. More followed. The case would likely go on for years, but the message was immediate. Janice hadn't just targeted me. She had abused an entire community. And now, justice was catching up. In the final days before Janice's trial, I returned to the lot where my house once stood. It was still mostly scorched earth and cracked concrete, but I stood there with a calm heart. Buster walked beside me, sniffing the ashes, then sitting quietly at my feet. I didn't see a ruin. I saw the beginning. I already had plans for the rebuilt, same layout, but fireproof insulation, steel frame, and a new security system wired directly into the local sheriff's office. but more importantly, I had plans for the land around it. You see, in the aftermath of the investigation, the HOA's assets were frozen, the association itself was declared null, and the private entrance road, the one they had used as their main source of control, was up for grabs. So I bought it quietly, legally, every square foot. The main entrance to Pine Ridge Estates was now mine, and a new sign would be going up soon. Large, bold letters on a clean steel plate. Private property, Nitro Authority. Beyond this point, some would see it as revenge. I saw it as balance, line drawn, and a lesson carved into stone. Never let small people with small power think they can play God in other people's lives, because one day, someone might just burn brighter than their fire and bring everything crashing down. The trial of Janice Porter began on a rainy Monday morning in the downtown federal courthouse. Gray skies hung low, the kind that matched the mood of the crowd that gathered outside. Reporters swarmed the front steps. Former residents from Pine Ridge Estates stood with umbrellas and quiet resolve, many of them gripping manila folders filled with old HOA notices, fines, and complaint letters no one had listened to until now. I arrived through the back entrance, as most judges or former judges do when it's not their trial. I wasn't testifying that day, but I wanted to see her face, not out of hate, not even out of anger. I wanted to see if she still believed she was untouchable. She did. Janice entered the courtroom with her chin held high, wearing a pressed navy suit and that same hollow smile she gave me the day my house burned to the ground. Her lawyers flanked her on either side. They whispered constantly in her ear like handlers, like they had to remind her she wasn't in charge anymore. The courtroom was packed. Victims, officials, former board members, everyone sat shoulder to shoulder. Judge Mendelsohn presided over the case, a no-nonsense type, sharp as a tack and known for her zero tolerance for manipulation. I'd worked beside her before. I knew Janice was in for a brutal few weeks. The charges were many: conspiracy to commit arson, obstruction of justice, wire fraud, mail fraud, abuse of position, and unlawful enrichment through HOA funds. It sounded like a corporate crime trial because that's what this was. Janice hadn't just bent the rules. She had built an entire corrupt system under the guise of community enforcement. The prosecution opened strong. Lead prosecutor Elena Cruz walked the jury through the timeline with calm confidence. She showed them footage from the hidden cameras Glenn Nichols caught on tape, lighting the fire. She showed email threads that read like criminal blueprints, veiled threats, approval of fines without justification, and coded language about removing the problem next door. They called victims to the stand. First was an elderly woman, Mrs. Halvorsen, whose home was nearly foreclosed on because her shutters were painted cream instead of beige. She was fined repeatedly, harassed, and eventually moved out of fear. She cried as she explained how helpless she had felt. Then came Davis, the veteran with the American flagpole. His voice shook with emotion as he told the jury how he'd served 3 tours overseas, only to come home and be threatened with legal action for honoring his country. One by one, the stories built a wall of evidence, not just of Janice's direct actions, but of the toxic culture she had created. The HOA wasn't a group of neighbors, it was her personal kingdom. By the third day, I was called to testify. I took the stand, not as a judge, but as a man who'd nearly lost everything. I kept my answers precise, professional. I explained my property's exemption from the HOA, the threats I'd received, the harassment I documented, and finally, the night of the fire. I kept my composure until they asked what I'd lost. Everything, I said softly. Not just the home, not just the furniture. I lost the place I was supposed to feel safe after a lifetime of service. And I lost it because I said no. Janice looked away. Maybe. Finally, she understood, but I didn't care if she did. I wasn't there for her. I was there for the people she hurt and silenced. Her defense team tried their best. They claimed Glenn Nichols acted alone, that the fines were legitimate, that the board followed standard community policies, but the evidence was overwhelming. They couldn't explain the misused funds. They couldn't justify the illegal boundary enforcement. They certainly couldn't explain why Janice had written in an email, "Once he's gone, the rest will fall in line." The trial stretched over 2 weeks, but it never felt slow. Every witness chipped away at the wall Janice had built around herself. Her calm, polished exterior began to crack. She no longer smiled. She no longer made eye contact with the gallery. By the time Glenn Nichols testified against her accepting a plea deal for a reduced sentence, she looked like a shadow of the woman who once ruled Pine Ridge Estates. When closing arguments were finished, the jury took less than 5 hours to return with a verdict. Guilty. On all counts. The sentence would come later. But the courtroom erupted not in celebration, but in relief. Quiet, collective release, as if the entire neighborhood had been holding its breath for years and was finally allowed to exhale afterward. I stood on the courthouse steps. Reporters shouted questions. Flashing cameras lit up the rain. "Judge Hayes, are you satisfied with the outcome? What message does this send to HOAs across the country? Do you plan to return to Pine Ridge?" I answered one question and one only. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. No one, no matter their title or position gets to rule with fear. Then I stepped away and let the story tell itself. In the weeks that followed, things changed quickly. With the HOA legally dissolved, a new neighborhood council formed, voluntary, transparent, and with zero enforcement power. It was a group of residents, not rulers. They organized block cleanups, neighborhood barbecues, and even held a vote to remove all remaining violation signage from the streets. It was no longer a place of fear. It was a community again. I was invited back to speak at the first community meeting. I didn't give a speech, I just stood up, thanked them for the courage to come forward, and promised them that I wouldn't leave them to clean up the mess alone. The land where my home once stood was already being prepped for construction. A local group offered to help rebuild it for free, but I declined. I wanted to fund it myself. Not because of pride, but because I wanted every brick, every board, to be a quiet statement. You did not break me. I visited the lot often. Sometimes, Buster and I would sit on a folding chair and just listen to the wind through the trees. Other times I'd meet neighbors passing by, people who once avoided eye contact but now offered kind words, handshakes, and sometimes just a nod that said, "Thank you." One afternoon a teenager rode past on his bike and waved. He was wearing headphones, music blasting, and a neon green jacket that definitely didn't match approved community attire. I waved back and smiled. That, right there, was progress. Janice was sentenced to 22 years. In federal prison, the court ordered restitution for every homeowner she had wronged. Her personal accounts were seized, her properties liquidated. Glenn Nichols received 12 years and a permanent ban from working in any security-related field. The remaining former board members were issued bans from holding any neighborhood positions for life, and still, that wasn't the end. The class action suit filed by the residents moved forward. Karen Liu, my attorney, represented them pro bono. I didn't ask her to, she offered, said it felt like justice unfinished. And as for me, I didn't go back to being a judge. That chapter was closed, but I accepted an offer to consult with a federal task force focused on housing abuse, predatory HOAs, and local corruption. My experience had turned personal, and I intended to use it. If it could happen to me, a federal judge with decades of experience, it could happen to anyone. That was the truth that burned hotter than the fire ever did, and I wouldn't let it happen again, not on my watch. Months passed, and Pine Ridge Estates no longer resembled the neighborhood it once was. The polished perfection of fake harmony had peeled away. What replaced it wasn't flawless, but it was real. People began talking to each other again. Porches that had once sat empty now held potted plants, wind chimes, and neighbors who waved without fear of being fined for minor violations. The silence that Janice had enforced like a rule was finally broken. I kept my distance at first, not out of bitterness, more out of respect. They needed space to grow without my shadow looming over them. For a long time, I had been the man who brought the judge's hammer down on the HOA, and while most appreciated it, I knew some still wrestled with their own guilt for not speaking up sooner, for going along with the rules, for being silent when others were bullied. But forgiveness takes time, and so does healing. One Saturday morning, I got a call from Karen Liu. She sounded more excited than usual, even for her turn on Channel 6, she said. Now, the TV flickered to a live news segment showing a press conference. U.S. Attorney General Seal stood tall behind a podium. A familiar face stepped up to the mic. It was Special Agent Marla Doyle, the same agent who investigated the arson. She looked serious, composed, and driven. "We are announcing a national task force," she said, "dedicated to rooting out corruption, abuse, and illegal practices in homeowners associations across the United States." I sat forward in my chair. "This effort will be guided by legal experts, community advocates, and individuals who have been directly impacted by HOA misconduct. And it is with great pride," she paused, "that I share that retired federal Judge Alan Hayes will be serving as special advisor to the task force." I blinked, stunned. Karen's voice returned through the phone, almost smug. "I told you they'd want you." I wasn't sure whether to laugh or groan. A week later, stood in a press room filled with flashing cameras, microphones, and curious eyes. The idea of being in front of the media used to make me uneasy, but now it felt like a responsibility. I wasn't just speaking as a man who had lost his home. I was representing thousands of others who never got their story heard. My speech was short. "We are not trying to destroy homeowners associations. We are here to make sure they never destroy people again. Rules are fine. Order has a place, but the law exists to protect, not punish. If your HOA feels like a private army, we're coming for it. If it feels like a dictatorship, we're going to tear it down. And if it's using fear instead of fairness, we will make sure that ends permanently." The room burst into applause. Some clapped because they believed me. Others clapped because they hoped I was right. After the press conference, I returned to the construction site where my new home was finally taking shape. The foundation was done. The wooden frame stood tall against the sky. A few workers waved as I approached. Buster ran ahead, tail wagging, tongue out. I sat down on the edge of what would soon be my front porch. I looked out over the neighborhood. There were kids riding bikes, a woman walking her dog, someone mowing a lawn that didn't match HOA standards, and no one cared. That alone was a victory. Then something unexpected happened. A small group of neighbors gathered at the edge of my lot. At first I thought they were just curious, but one of them, a woman named Camila, stepped forward holding a clipboard. "We've taken a vote," she said. "A community vote, not an HOA rule or anything like that." I raised an eyebrow. "A vote on what?" She smiled and handed me the clipboard. It was a petition signed by over 60 residents asking me to become the neighborhood's official mediator, not a judge, not a board member, just someone they trusted to help solve disputes fairly. I looked up at her. "You sure you want a retired federal judge poking around in your fence arguments and loud dog complaints?" She laughed. "You're the only one who ever made this place feel human again." I smiled, nodded, and signed the bottom line. "All right," I said, "but I'm not wearing a robe." They laughed. It felt good. The months that followed were some of the most fulfilling of my life. I worked closely with the federal task force, traveling across the country, sitting in living rooms and town halls, listening to stories that sounded far too familiar. HOAs that fined veterans for flying flags, HOAs that destroyed community gardens, HOAs that levied fees so steep families were forced out of their own homes. And for the first time, something changed, because now there was accountability. The task force launched investigations in 8 states. They froze HOA accounts, filed charges, shut down entire boards, and more importantly, they worked with good HOAs, those existed, to create a model of fairness and transparency. The press called it the Hayes Standard. I hated the name, but I understood why it stuck. Meanwhile, Pine Ridge flourished. The kids built a community treehouse in an old maple near the park. Something Janice once banned for being visually distracting. A community garden grew where the old HOA office once stood. And every few weeks someone stopped by my porch just to talk. Sometimes it was about property lines, sometimes it was about life. People had learned that sometimes being heard was more powerful than being right. And as for Janice, she wasn't allowed visitors for a while. But one day I got a letter. It was brief. "Alan, I was wrong. Not just about you, but about power. I thought control meant safety. I confused silence with order. And I hurt people because I didn't want to feel powerless again. I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know that." I never wrote back. Not because I hated her, but because some things didn't need to be reopened. I had already moved on. The new house was finished one crisp autumn morning. Nothing fancy. Single story, wood siding, white porch, big windows to let the light in. A small brass plaque hung by the front door. It read, "Built back stronger." I stood in the doorway, Buster at my side, and took a deep breath. The air smelled of cedar, earth, and possibility. I didn't just get my home back, I got my peace. Justice didn't always look like a courtroom. Sometimes it looked like a neighbor finally planting sunflowers without fear. Sometimes it was the silence between two people who didn't need to speak to understand one another. And sometimes, justice looked like the fire, clearing the way for something better. That fire tried to destroy me, but it built something much stronger instead. And now it's my turn to make sure no one else has to go through what I did. Not while I'm still standing, not while I still have a voice, not while this story still matters. Because justice doesn't end when the gavel drops. Sometimes, that's exactly when it begins. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more real-life drama and justice stories. This is Bright Reality, where truth burns brighter than fiction.